Dear students, the topic of discussion we have today is on introduction of Indian political thought. First, I would summarize the lecture and then we would go into the details of the lecture. Now I start with the summarization. Political thought offers solutions for the contemporary problems and offers political actions for any civilized societies. The ideas of great political thinkers are not necessarily representative of any age. Indian political thought supports a moral, altruistic and tolerant human being who needs a plural social setup and a limited polity for his fulfillment. The study of Indian political thought can include a history of political ideas approach. The Indian political tradition has its starting point in the oldest Hindu literature. The Indian political thought has undergone centuries of interpretation and revision in the literary epics, legal codes, and political texts before the Christian era. The basis of Indian political thought is found in the Vedas, the Brahmanas, the Dharma Shastras, in the Arthashastra and Niti Shastra literature, notably Kautilya's Arthashastra and Manu Samhita, in some of the early Buddhist and Jainist writings, and in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The most significant portion of the Dharma literature is the Raja Dharma or duty of kings. If the king does not perform his duties, it will lead to Matsyanyaya, that is, where the big fish will eat the smaller fish. That means it will lead to anarchy. Indian political thought we have been discussing about in this lecture. We find the contribution of Ziauddin Barani in the medieval political thought and also the contributions of the Indian political thinkers of the modern period. Indian political thought is a fusion of influence and ideas. The essence of political thought does not consist in its being original, in the sense that it contains elements unknown to earlier thinkers. On the contrary, every political thinker has necessarily to build on the achievements of his predecessors. Much of Western political thought consists of elaborations of principles implicit or briefly stated in the writings of political thinkers in Greece and Rome. Now we would discuss on the objectives of the presentation. There are several objectives. The first one is to understand why we are studying political thought. The second one is to analyze the ancient political thought. The third objective is to examine the ideas of Ziauddin Barani. And finally, we will try to understand the content of Indian political thought. Political thought offers solutions for the contemporary problems and offers political actions for any civilized societies. The ideas of great political thinkers are not necessarily representative of any age. Indian political thought stands by a moral, altruistic, and tolerant human being who needs a plural social setup and a limited polity for his fulfillment. Study of Indian political thought can include a history of political ideas approach. In India, the whole edifice of politics revolves round the spiritual nature of man, which reflects upon the purposes of social organizations and nature of political authority. The political thought of any thinker must be judged by the contribution it makes to the understanding of the political problems of the time, by the way in which it illuminates the principles of political action in civilized societies which have relevance to later times. This is why we return to the classics even if the actual content in which they were written is no longer of interest to us. Every political philosopher has a view of human nature and of the forces which bind society, the nature of authority, and the purposes of social organization. These constitute the binding elements in the structure of his political philosophy, and they are necessarily generalized and abstract. They may conflict with the forces which in any given situation constantly impinge on the decision makers, but they may have relevance in later times for other men placed in similar situations. The Indian political tradition has its beginnings in the oldest Hindu literature. They have undergone centuries of interpretation and revision in the literary epics, legal codes, and political texts before the Christian era. Much of ancient Indian political thought is found in the Vedas, the Brahmanas, the Dharmashastras, in the Arthashastra and Nitishastra literature, notably Kautilya's Arthashastra and the Manu Samhita. In some of the early Buddhist and Jain writings, and in the Ramayana and Mahabharata. There is general agreement among most classic Hindu theorists that the ultimate goal of human endeavor is moksha or liberation. There are three lesser goals of human activity known as dharma, artha, and kama, which represents duty, wealth, and pleasure. These worldly objectives if properly understood, may lead one eventually to a state of existence where he may be able to seek moksha. Indian political thought deals with the problems of dharma and artha, which provide the foundations of political and social institutions. But the solution of these problems is a step towards ultimate moksha. Gandhiji supports the traditional viewpoint. Politics was entitled the master science since dealing with dharma, it covered vast range of human relationships. The most significant portion of the dharma literature is the Raja Dharma or the duty of the kings. Good ruling involves protection and promotion of proper relations between human beings, animals, plants, gods, and all other beings in the cosmos. The notion of politics as kingly rule is quite expansive. Stewardship is a useful term as it implies a wider network of relations as well as responsibility for other entities and purposes. Vedic kingship and ruling can then be understood as quite expansive because it involves not only human beings but all other conceivable beings within the cosmos as well. Proper kingly rule would be understood as a ruling structure that protects the fundamental orders of reality. Each of the four orders of reality is constructed and constructible, distinct yet interconnected. If the king does not perform his duties, it will lead to Matsyanaya, that is, where the big fish will eat the smaller fish. Or, in a way, it will lead to anarchy. Ancient Indian philosophy and political theory that refers to the idea that the strong will always devour the weak, similar to how big fish eat small fish. There can be a dissolution of the fundamental order. This dissolution would implicate much more than a Hobbesian or Lockean state of nature and probably entail wide-scale cosmic destruction involving all beings, including animals, plants, and gods. King should rule and wield the rod of punishment, danda, in a proper way to maintain the proper social order. In Kautilya's Arthashastra, the duties of the king has been very well explained. Kingly rule is built into the natural order of things in Brahmanical thought. Ortho, denoting substance, utility, property, also suggests a wide area of political topics. Kautilya's Arthashastra is a very important treatise on the art of government. Arthashastra is considered subordinate to Dharma Shastra. When there is a conflict, the rules of Dharma Shastra are considered superior to that of Arthashastra. Dharma is the ultimate basis of the Indian political thought. The purpose of the state was to reinforce the moral codes of society and to ensure justice among men, thereby guaranteeing the individual free opportunity to develop himself within the framework and recognized goals of his own caste. Varna is another basic political factor. It cannot be separated from the core idea of dharma. In the court of Vishnu, we find the king enjoined to keep the four castes and the four orders in the practice of their several duties. Each caste possessed certain distinct hereditary qualities which made its members peculiarly adapted to perform specific functions in the life of society and the state. The four castes were not competitive and complementary. According to the Rig Veda, they originated from the primeval Purusha or personified creative source of the universe as follows. The Brahman was his mouth, the Kshatriya formed his arms, the Vaishya his thighs, the Shudra was born from his feet. The priest then was dedicated to learning, the warrior to ruling, the merchant to trade, and the laborer to service. This division of function permeated the whole structure of the state and qualified the operations of the law as it was applied to the individuals of different classes. The origins of caste division have been explained by the great liberal writer Rabindranath Tagore as India's attempt to solve her complex social and racial problems by a system of specialization and toleration that minimize the frictions of ruthless competition. In Vedic and post-Vedic Brahmanical political thought, broadly agree that truth and reality anchor politics, kingship, or proper ruling. Now we will talk about the medieval period. The medieval period marks a distinct phase in the history of political thought in India. The Muslim rulers arrived in India and it had distinct impact on the socio-economic and politico-administrative lives of the people. The unique characteristic of the Islamic way of life was the belief in the universality of the law of the Quran. The laws were drawn from the teachings of Prophet Muhammad. The Shariat based on the Quran was accepted as the final authority. The state and the government were to serve the purposes of the Shariat. The political thought was based on the singular view of life. Ziauddin Barani can be taken as a representative thinker of the medieval times. His contribution is immense. Ziauddin Barani's two very important works are the Tariq-e-Firozshahi and the Fatwa-e-Jahandari. In Tariq-e-Firozshahi, Ziauddin Barani eulogized the rule of Firoz Shah Tughlaq in the beginning, but it ends with the criticism of his rule. It contains functional dynamics of monarchy in the medieval times. In Fatwa-e-Jahandari, there is theorization of the political philosophy in the Sultanate period. In this work, Ziauddin Barani commented on the political and administrative systems existing during the Delhi Sultanate. The Sultan was given a set of advices in guiding his conduct in personal and official fields. Ziauddin Barani stated that the Prophet was the embodiment of state on earth. The Almighty has blessed him. After the Prophet comes the Sultan. He rules over the people as the representative of God. The state in the medieval period was a theocratic state. In the medieval times, Ziauddin Barani's theory on polity has the characteristics of domination by the elites. The top levels of bureaucracy of the Sultan were aristocratic. The armed forces of the Sultan consisted of Muslim aristocratic class as commanders. The control of the state and the government in these times consisted of high-born traditional nobles. In the medieval times, Ziauddin Barani spoke of Zawabit. Ziauddin Barani favored the Zawabit as significant source of law. Their foundation were non-religious and secular. Zawabit should provide functional flexibility in the working of the departments of the government and provide loyalty to the king and the state. According to Ziauddin Barani, the king should have a good character. The king has to engage in conducting his responsibilities with certain methods and policies. These were suggested because in medieval times it was necessary that in order to have control over his kingdom, the king has to select the proper nobles who would assist him. According to Barani, the king is requested to accept Islamic Sharia from the core of his heart. The king has to evolve his policies for peace and war in consultation with his administrators, advisors, and commanders. The king in the medieval times is suggested to appoint good persons as commanders, administrators, and other officers of state. The king's responsibility is the highest one. The king will be accountable before God for all the events and actions taking place in his empire. Ziauddin Barani was unique as he provided the subtle transformations in the classical Islamic systems of state and government. Now we come to the modern times. In the modern times, the dynamic Swami Vivekananda has described Indian political development as a revolving of caste rule, one succeeding the other in the exercise of control. Like the Confucian political ethic in China and the Platonic in ancient Greece, the Hindus stressed the ultimate importance of political modernity. The Muslim conquest brought to an end the creative period of classic Indian political thought, and it was not until the 19th century that a strong current of creative thought began to flow again in the cultural life of India, a movement that may be designated the Indian Renaissance. Two notable tendencies we find in the modern Hindu political theorists are, on the one hand, the reaffirmation of the ancient dharma principles, and on the other, an emphasis on reform and universal ideals. In this spirit, Rabindranath Tagore acclaims some of India's classic virtues and at the same time pleads for internationalism. In this spirit, Mahatma Gandhi defends the fourfold caste system, and at the same time pleads for civil liberties. People have seen in this unique combination of respect for custom and sensitivity to the needs for reform a product of the union of European and Indian culture. The effect of the forces of the Indian Renaissance is, from this viewpoint, to establish a synthesis of the Western spirit of inquiry with 3,000 years of political tradition. The great political thinkers of modern India have been men of thought and action like Ram Mohan Roy, Syed Ahmad Khan, Swami Vivekananda, Aurobindo Ghosh, Rabindranath Tagore, Iqbal, Mahatma Gandhi, Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Jawaharlal Nehru. Gandhiji never tried to evolve a consistent political philosophy. His writings, statements and actions are full of contradictions and inconsistencies. There was no politics devoid of religion. He preached the superiority of one's conscience over any mighty power in the world. Now we would conclude the lecture saying that India is a fusion of influence and ideas, where the Western impact was the most intimate and where a continuous civilization of high level was flourished.
After hearing the lecture, let's see if we can answer the questions.
Thank you so much for listening to the lecture.